my talk is Hybridity as Cultural Capital, and then the subtitle, which didn't get added on until too late for the poster, is Jet Set, Trendset, Art Stars in Shanghai. And I'm by no means trying to give an overview of contemporary art now in Shanghai. I just want to show you a recent trend which I noticed while I was there, which is an emphasis on cultural hybridity as a sort of a marketing tool for contemporary art in the global art marketplace, and some examples of how that gets played out. So I'm shifting the focus to another city that we haven't talked about that much yet, in mainland China, which is Shanghai, which perhaps is vying with Hong Kong for that title in Sawsons at the end of London, Paris, right? London, New York, Shanghai. So here we see it, it's in full development. You have Pudong up at the top with the Oriental Pearl TV Tower, which used to be primarily farmland on the other side of the Huangpu River in Shanghai, and is now being developed with these kinds of also suburban developments, like the Orange County ones that Henry talked about. And also, right now, Shanghai is bracing itself for the 2010 Shanghai Expo that it will host, with the same kind of fervor that we recently witnessed in Beijing at the Olympics. I want to start by looking at one architectural experiment that's said to embody Shanghai as it is in its present state, and this is Xintiandi, which Carolyn mentioned earlier. It is a shopping district designed by an American Boston-based architect, Benjamin Wood, and a perfect example of the simulacrum, like Henry mentioned, on par with the Orange County housing developments in Beijing. We see mostly newly built longtongs and shikumen, which are the houses that are typical of the colonial style era of architecture in Shanghai. And so we have kind of an idealized, imagined nostalgia that is used in the promotion of brand name goods. It's a big shopping district with luxury boutiques and restaurants, and as well as chains such as Haagen-Dazs, Starbucks, and McDonald's, which ubiquitously now dot the Shanghainese landscape. Unfortunately, I think I might be missing a few images. So, but you can get the gist with the one on the left. So, ironies abound here. Over 2,000 residents were displaced in the building of Xintiandi, and their homes, which were dilapidated, original shikumen, demolished also to allow for its construction. What you're missing is the original building, perhaps this is appropriate, what you're missing is the original building that still stands there, which is now a museum, and it's historically important because it was the site of the first communist congressional meeting in Shanghai in 1921. So now it's been converted into a museum. You see an interior shot on the right with memorabilia kind of celebrating the revolutionaries who helped to break Shanghainese residents free of imperialist powers. So, well, I guess I want to ask if it's probably, I suspect, too simple of a reading to see Xintiandi as an architectural space or an authentic Chinese neighborhood which has been absorbed under American global capitalism. I'm trying to think about it more as existing as hybrid, in the sense that it's somewhere in between a mythically constructed East and West, in between old and new as a rebuilt colonial architecture, and in between what now seems to be the sustainable coexistence of China's Communist Party and an accelerated global capitalism. But that's not to say that China is separate or outside of this. And I just want to point to one quote by scholars Eric Derlick and Shudong Zhang, who in Postmodernism in China wrote, quote, "Under conditions of global capitalism, Chinese states and populations are no longer merely the objects of forces emanating from Euro-America, but are themselves significant contributors to the operations of capitalism." So if we look back briefly to Shanghai's history, we can see that its psyche's always been characterized by a really intimate relationship with foreign powers and with trade. It's strategically positioned on China's eastern coast and along the Huangpu River. At the same time, unlike Hong Kong, it was never fully colonized. It was a semi-colony. Divided up into foreign concessions. Here you see the famous historic one, which was the English concession on the right. There's a mixture of traditional Chinese architectural styles mixing with Western or foreign architecture on the left. So it was divided up into foreign concessions, and surely many of its local residents had to undergo great exploitation. not allowed to enter the foreign concessions, as one example. However, the relationship with foreign trades like in Hong Kong also brought the city great prosperity, and is also known as mainland China's most open-minded cosmopolitan city for these encounters. Okay. These kinds of questions about the ambivalence and the kind of confused state of being in between for Shanghai citizens continue to be raised, and also in art shows and in the art world. So in the 2002 Shanghai Biennial, for example, curator Fan Dian writes, viewing China through the process of urbanization provides a complex understanding of the great changes and schizophrenia that have occurred in Chinese society over the past 2 decades. His pointing to schizophrenia is a way of kind of thinking about the impact of modernization in Shanghai and its impact upon individuals in the city. And if you're there and you get really caught up in the shopping and the development and the frenzy of it all, it is hard to question whether or not global capitalism within the city is alleviating or worsening these kinds of confused states of being. I'm just too confused, you can't see them outside. So, of course, not surprisingly, recent trends in the art market have mirrored these the Xintiandi's kind of successful development and stress on cultural hybridity. So I wanted to just give you a smattering of things that were occurring this summer. There was the Zocalo lecture, LA versus Shanghai, who is the art capital of the Pacific Rim, an exhibition hosted by MoCA in Shanghai entitled Material Link, a dialogue between Greek and Chinese artists. The Contrast Gallery held a show only about Asian American artists entitled Meiguo, the Beau Monde, Meiguo meaning America in Chinese. The Shanghai Biennial, which just opened, entitled Translocal Motion, which looked at migration patterns from rural to urban, from the rural to urban space, but also foreign migration within the context of the city. And then there was the Shanghai Contemporary Art Fair, whose promotional material reads, I'll just quote you at the beginning, "It is a great pleasure to welcome you to Shanghai Contemporary 08, where 140 selected galleries from 25 countries create an intriguing dialogue between the Orient and the Occident art scenes, where the best galleries from the East are juxtaposed with top Western galleries." So you see this kind of emphasis not on anymore promoting just a singularly Chinese art, but trying to look at these encounters between Chinese art and the West, or what's loosely identified as hybrids between the two. This is a work by Yue Ming Juan, who presented at the Shanghai Biennial, entitled "Colorful Running Dinosaurs." And the catalog entry for it reads, quote, "This is an image of a Chinese dragon, thus ancient Chinese mythology mixed with the modern. The sculpture is spray painted, a method commonly used in the automotive industry to speak of the irony of excessive use of energy and imply that if it goes on at its current pace, the car will become like a dinosaur," end quote. It seems, however, that Yue's kind of or the complexities of ongoing modernization. These are the same kind of formal tactics that he uses in his paintings, where they're said to mix pop aesthetics with Chineseness, but the only real Chinese signifiers are his laughing portraits or banal gestures towards imagery of traditional China, like the Chinese dragon we just saw, which actually further enforce stereotypes and cliches. Even if the irony is perhaps responding to propaganda art of the Cultural Revolution or other such motifs that it's said to, but in fact, I would argue that his paintings instead, this mixing, in fact, creates luxury items that are able to straddle the divides between popular culture and high art, but in a way that doesn't create a meaningful dialogue between the two. And these are the same kinds of things you see in Wang Guangyi's work, which Richard mentioned before, this kind of false dissidence. And again, you see his tactics of appropriating Andy Warhol's pop aesthetics and also imagery from China's Cultural Revolution into paintings that now sell for $1.6 million and are easily replicated and often are by emerging artists as well. These kinds of works also give way to shows that emphasize these East-West encounters. So you see here Pace Gallery, which is a big New York-based gallery, just opened a space in Beijing at the 798 district, and their opening show was entitled Encounters. And here you see a Wang Wangyi juxtaposed against an Andy Warhol. And their show basically had Chinese artists all matched up to one Western artist that kind of looked similar. So yeah, basically what this does is, again, further kind of instills cliches, stereotypes, and cultural difference, and also detrimentally always positions the Chinese artist as somehow coming after a Western precedent. Just to give you a feeling of how this kind of formula of hybridity gets repeated, this is the Shanghai Sculpture Space, which recently opened as one of these new culture districts promoted by the government, sponsored by the government. And inside you find most of the sculpture to have this kind of aesthetic, which is mixing pop and traditional Chinese motifs. Here's just one example, and the label accompanying it reads, "By way of modern sculpture, the Chinese traditional wedding custom is presented in the compromise between virtual and actual views, lending the mystery of the character and the sculpture to the audience." Almost all of them will have some reference to traditional China or how it's mixing with popular culture or with Western culture. An artist, a Shanghai-based artist who I think is doing something more interesting with notions of hybridity is the video artist Yang Fudong. This is a still from his film Backyard, Hey, Sun is Rising. In it, 4 men in uniforms rush around modern Shanghai, feverish and revolt, but unable to find an enemy. They're part samurai, part intellectual, part red guard, part feudal lords. They're anachronistic characters, but they don't have any real kind of past that's identifiable. According to critic Charles Merriweather, quote, "The image represents the far side of the heroic or productive bodies that were as much a product of the media as an ideological construction of the China subject under map. They are now either comic book characters out of the movies or a class that belongs to a contemporary China increasingly shaped by the dream factory of a commodity culture." End quote. Yang Fudong seems to be taking steps towards a deeper questioning of the stakes of hybridity. And for him, it's particularly a question of the awkward position of the intellectual in contemporary urban Chinese society, as seen in one of his earlier works, which was this is one image from the triptych. An intellectual stands in a barren street in Shanghai, angry with the brick, but has nobody to direct his portraits. Other Shanghainese artists, especially Zhou Tiehai, have shunned the use of Chinese imagery altogether because of what he sees as its easy marketability. However, instead he appropriates Joe the Camel, for example. This is a big kind of iconic work, and he's done lots of paintings like this. But he still uses the same formal tactics, which are appropriation, pastiche, and replication of his own kind of cult of the personality, and now these paintings as well have entered into the market and achieved for him major financial success, which he readily admits is his #1 goal. Perhaps more interestingly are his works that attest to this really intimate tie between so-called Chinese avant-garde and the art market. So here we see an image from his press conference, which reads, "The relations in the art world are the same as the relations between states in the post-Cold War era." He also did a video in 1996 entitled Will, which attests to this relationship between the Chinese art market and avant-garde artists. This is just a quick excerpt, so I'll just give you a few lines so you get an idea for it. "A guide announces the schedule for a few foreigners. This morning we'll go to see A's home to see his works. Then we'll see B's works. In the afternoon we'll go to see C's works, and then D's works. I want to see X's works. X's work isn't very interesting," a foreigner says. Another foreigner says, "I've heard that Z is an astounding artist. Shall we go and see his work as well?" The guide says, "Z lives far from here. We don't have enough time." Joe Tiehai, in the end, his conclusion in just conversations I've had with him is that the avant-garde is a business, which makes my heart heavy as somebody who is very interested in at least the historic avant-gardes. And here he is in his studio, and you can see, in congruence with his rejection of painting any Chinese imagery at all, he's also rejected painting at all. So he hires instead students to do all his paintings for him as a kind of polemical position, and sees himself more as a manager or a facilitator, which is not an uncommon practice amongst contemporary artists. But in this way, his production methods might also mirror those of the artist Zhang Huan, who we looked at earlier, who has seemingly abandoned his, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's abandoned his performance practices, like the early one in the Beijing East Village, in which he sat in a toilet for an hour, and has instead shifted to the creation of monumental sculptures, which he is said to have factory-like workers of about 100 working for him in Shanghai to produce these things. Okay, this is Pearl Lam, who is one of the most important gallerists and collectors in Shanghai. She's Shanghai-based, she's from Hong Kong, and her gallery is also in Beijing. It's called the Contrast Gallery, where they had the Meiguo show. She sees both her home, and here you see her sitting in her home with her collection, and her contrast galleries as part of a hybridizing campaign. A good example of a piece from her collection is the sofa by Mattia Bonetti, which from far away it looks like you can see, it looks like there's been images from French and Chinese magazines printed on a couch, but when you walk up close you notice that it's actually hand embroidered. Pearl Lam writes, we realized that most of the Chinese crafts had disappeared, so we have to make something modern that makes a new use of the craft. So her notion about hybridity is not only one of cultural hybridity and the East-West cliche, but also one of the fusing of design and fine art. And her position is that the divide between design and fine art is actually a Western construction, and thus Chinese artists shouldn't be held accountable for being only in one camp, so to speak. This position does, I just want to briefly make it more complex. This position does get problematized by one, she's completely ignoring the Chinese tradition of art in which there is a very clear hierarchy, right? If you know a bit about more traditional Chinese art, poetry is at the top, and then we have calligraphy, and then Chinese ink painting. And the decorative arts don't even make it into that, that triangle. And also, of course, there's the relationship between fine art and design have always been complex, even in Western, so-called Western art history, especially with the historic avant-gardes who made it their aim to merge art and life. Also with Art Nouveau, at the turn of the century, we have the idea of Gesamtkunstwerk, or the total work of art, and this was an idea that was revived with Art Deco movement, which was famously embraced in Shanghai in the 1920s and 30s. Nonetheless, I think that Lam is calling attention to the kind of crux of what this hybridity really is. As opposed to this East-West, I do believe it's embedded and steeped more in the merging of fine art and design and the use of that through diversified production methods. So here we see another Shanghai-based artist, Gu Wenda, who also splits his time between Beijing and New York. And he proclaims that he is not a Shanghainese or a Chinese artist, but instead he's a cosmopolitan transcending all nations, a member of the world and not of one nation. Although he still gets written about as one of the most important Chinese artists to emerge in the 80s. So his United Nations project is probably his most famous installation. It collects human hair from over 200 countries, and it's been exhibited in various installations on all 5 continents that are supposedly site-specific to the continent. And his ultimate aim for the work is to create a utopian space in which all ethnicities commingle, to present a monument in which the woven human hair and world pseudo-languages. So he's also crafted this kind of a made-up language. It's deconstructed with bits of from Chinese characters, also bits of ancient seal script, also English and Arabic that are all kind of merging together into a deconstructed pseudo-language. He sees the coexistence of this as a great utopia, of the unification of mankind, a utopia which probably can never exist in our reality, but will be fully realized in the art world. When I asked him to kind of elaborate on his ideas of utopia, they seemed a bit confused, and I fear that the word's getting thrown around. He said that some businessmen have accused him of being a communist, and likened it to the utopian visions of Mao, but that he saw it instead as referring particularly to the French Revolution, but he also sees his project not as political, only as cultural. So I think those ideas are still getting worked out, but again, I see the hybridity existing more in his merging of architecture and design and fine arts. So here we have his latest project. This is a proposal for it. This hasn't actually been created. Heavenly Lantern, in which he proposes to drape monuments in cities across the world in red lanterns. Again, a kind of rather cliche sign of Chineseness. But here you see his proposal to drape it upon the Jingmao Tower in Shanghai, which it itself could be considered hybridized as a skyscraper, but also in a pagoda-like form. So of this project, he says that he positions himself as a director and mobilizer, orchestrating collaborations between corporations, governments, architects, and engineers. So in this way, on a larger scale than Zhou Tiehai, he sees himself as playing this kind of role of administrator, artist as administrator. He also talked about the advertising potential that advertisers could label these lanterns. And we see this kind of mixing of architecture and design and fine art also with, Ai Weiwei and his contributions to the bird nest and other architectural projects in Beijing. And then the Forest of Stone Steles this is the last project I'll talk about by Guandala, which probably really speaks to this kind of diversified modes of production. So in this project, it does have the cultural translation as its motif, in which there's a set of Tang Dynasty poetry which has been translated into English, and he translates it back based on the phonetics into Chinese characters. But what I find more interesting and less kind of literal is his production methods. He gets artisans in Xi'an to carve the steles for him, which seems to be a very popular practice now amongst artists who are celebrated as kind of non-Western artists. Another one is Yutaka Sone, who's a Japanese artist, and this piece is Highway Junction of 405 and the 10, which was exhibited at LA MoCA. So he makes marble models of cities that you can see from overhead, right? And they're it's carved models, so it's a very virtuoso kind of a work that people get really impressed by. And not too many know, I don't think that Yutaka Sone uses all artisans in Fujian province to create these works. And Yang Fudong also recently exhibited at the one I talked about back here, Hey Sun is Rising. He recently exhibited at the Guangzhou Triennial a big sculpture of a dragon that was also crafted by artisans in Shanxi province. I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around what this kind of shift in production modes may mean, or if it may have any significance, especially as we kind of re-theorize notions of globalization and transnationalism. Of course, those kind of skilled artisans are being rendered outmoded. So perhaps the artists are actually reviving this kind of outmoded practice, or perhaps they're merely working in the same vein as companies that produce products in China. But I think it deserves a lot more theoretical unpacking. So I'll stop there and open up to questions. Thank you.